Hi, this is Mrs. Leland, and today's learning journey is going to be about pedigrees. We're going to look at what is a pedigree, how do you read a pedigree, and how are pedigrees useful in biology. Okay, so the first question really is, what is a pedigree? What does it look like? And when we think of pedigrees, we think of looking at breeding lines of dogs and their ancestors or the parents that they came from. And that's kind of the same thing here. What you're looking at right now is a pedigree for Elizabeth II. And pedigrees are used in genetics to look at certain traits. So, for example, here this is a pedigree of the royal family and hemophilia. Anytime we look at a pedigree, there are certain characteristics about it that are consistent with each one. So, for example, here if you look at the key, anytime you see this darkened box, you're going to see an individual that has hemophilia. This happens to be a recessive trait, and we learned about recessive and dominant traits earlier in our genetics unit. So we would end up using something like this to look at the inheritance pattern of this disease and how it's affecting this family. Before we get started in looking at pedigrees and patterns of inheritance, I want to just remind you guys of a couple things that we've already talked about in class. The first one would be sex chromosomes. And we spent some time talking about how a normal female has two X sex chromosomes, and a normal male has an X and a Y. And we looked at some traits found on these chromosomes, and we're going to look at those and specifically identify them as something called a sex-linked trait. And we spent some time, so sex-linked, we spent some time looking at a couple of examples of that. When we did Punnett squares, right, we looked at color blindness. We looked at hemophilia and some other traits. We're also going to look at something called an autosome or an autosomal trait. So that's another way of writing this. So autosomes, autosomal traits, autosomal traits. Okay, and these are traits that are found on every chromosome except your sex-linked chromosomes. So they're the other 44 chromosomes, not the X or Y sex-determining chromosome. These were traits that when we did our Punnett squares, we had a dominant and a recessive allele, or we had co-dominant alleles, or we had incomplete dominance. Those are those multiple alleles, right? A, B, and O. These are all traits that were found on our autosomal traits that are found on our autosomes or other 44 chromosomes. Okay, earlier I showed you a picture of a pedigree and reminded you a little bit about Punnett squares. But the big question is, what exactly is a pedigree besides that confusing diagram that we looked at earlier? And why is it important? Well, a pedigree is going to show us a pattern of inheritance. And what we're going to look is we're going to look at families and specific traits. And we focus on phenotype. These are things that we can see. Maybe not actually in appearance, but we can tell by asking an individual, are you colorblind or not? So we know that phenotype. We know whether or not they have the ability to see color. And we can use those phenotypes to figure out what a genotype is. And that's what a pedigree is going to help us figure out. If we know that parents have a trait, what is the likelihood that they're going to pass it on to their offspring? These are all things that we can look at when we use pedigrees. All right, so the first important thing about reading pedigrees is really looking at the key. What do all those shapes mean? Well, anytime we see a circle, that's going to be a female. Anytime we see a square, that's going to be a male. And anytime we see a horizontal line between a female and a male, that's going to tell us that they're a mated pair, that they're going to have offspring together. So make sure you go into your comprehension constructor and make sure you have your key labeled on your pedigree, right? Circles are females, squares are males, and horizontal lines indicate that these two individuals are married or are going to have offspring together. If you need to pause this presentation, you can pause it, right? So I would hit pause, take a second, and make sure that your comprehension constructor is filled out. Next thing that you need to make sure that you have for your key is to look at how individuals are related to one another. And the first thing is offspring are shown below parents. So right here I have a circle, which is a female, mated to a square, which is a male. The line goes down in between the female and the male, and we see their children. So right here they have a son, and over here they have a female, a child. And we know that they're the children because we trace them up to the parents. Also, you'll notice that this individual right here is shaded in black. These other three are blue, but this boy is black. And whenever we're looking at a studied trait, so if we're looking at color blindness, if we're looking at albinoism, which is the lack of a pigment in the skin, so you end up having individuals who have white hair and the inability to get tan, whatever our studied trait is, that's going to be shaded in on the individuals who have it. So right here we have two parents. They have a boy. This is their eldest boy. He has whatever the trait is we're looking at. They have a daughter. She doesn't have the trait. One of your assignments, you're going to see these half-filled in boxes, and those are relating to a heterozygous individual. Okay, let's look at some other things or characteristics found in pedigree. So you'll notice over here we have these Roman numerals, 1, 2, 3. And those are generations. So this right here is our eldest generation. So we could say that these are the grandparents. Okay, these grandparents have mated. They have one eldest daughter. So our oldest offsprings are going to be on the left. So here's our second generation. We have a daughter. And if we go over, they had a son. So that's their middle child. And if we go over, they had another daughter. She's the youngest. This daughter is married to this man. They have two kids. The oldest is a female, the youngest is a male. If we go over here, we can see that these two are married. They have two children. This is our third generation, so effectively this is grandma and grandpa. This is mom and dad, and these are their offspring. You'll also notice that right here we have an affected male, and right here we have an affected male. We also have a phone ringing. So we're going to look at this right here, right? We talked before about how shaded in means that we have the traits, okay? So I'm going to have you pause for a minute, and I'm going to have you count how many males are present, and I also want to know how many females are present. So you need to pause the presentation, I'm going to check, count it out, we're going to make sure we're on the same page, and then when you're done, then push play, and you'll figure out what the answer is. Okay, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 females. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 males. And I have 2 males, like I said before, that are affected with the trait that we're going to be looking at. Okay, during this presentation, I also have some questions for you to look at. So what I want you to do is look at that pedigree that I looked at before, and I want you to quiz yourself and figure out how many females show the trait being studied. So push pause. Count how many females are affected. Alright, so if we're looking at the number of females affected, remember we talked before about how they need to be shaded in. This square right here is a male. We have 0 females that are shaded in. Therefore, we have 0 females that have the trait that we are studying. Okay, next question we have that I want you to pause after I ask it before you find the answer. It's the best way to figure out if you know what's going on or not. As I want you to figure out what the sex is, gender, of offspring 3, 6. So we're looking at generation 3, offspring 6. So push pause, take a moment, figure it out, then push play. Okay, so here's our first, second, third generation, offspring 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's a square, therefore it's going to be a male. Okay, this is his sister right here. Right, here's his dad. Here's his mom, here's grandma, and here's grandpa. Okay, next question. How many children did generation 1 have? Okay, let's look at this pedigree. So here, right here, is generation 1. Okay, they're mated. We follow the line down. So they have 1, 2, and 3. I want you to make sure you don't think that these are their offspring, right? These are the spouses. These two are married, these two are married, these two are married. So we only have 3 offspring. Okay, next we're going to look at how individual 3-3 and 3-4 are related. So push pause, take a minute, figure out what you think the answer is. All right, so we're going to go to generation 3, which is right here. And we're going to count individual 1, 2, here's 3, and individual number 4. They have a line that goes up and connects. It's not, this right here, remember, is our marriage line. But these two go up and they connect here, so we know that they are brother and sister. Okay, next one we're going to look at is how 1-1 and 2-3 are related. So push pause, take a minute, check, make sure that you're understanding what's going on before you push play. Make sure you have your answer written down. Okay, so individual 1, 1. So here's generation 1, individual 1. I'm going to star that right here or circle it. Okay, and I have generation 2, individual 1, 2, 3 right here. I have a square, which is a male, and a square, which is male, and if I follow the line down, I know that they are father and son. Okay, great. Hopefully you have the whole square, square male, round female, and relationships between individuals sorted out, because now we're actually going to look at traits, which is really the important part of pedigree. So we're going to look at the easiest part now, and that's going to be autosomal. Remember, those are the things that are not on the X chromosome. Those are traits that are going to be either a capital R or lowercase r, right? Dominant and recessive traits is mostly what we're going to look at. So let's look at autosomal. That's referring to the fact that it's not on the X chromosome, right? It's not a sex-linked trait. We're going to look at the recessive ones first, because that's the easiest to look at. Important thing for you to write down, so I want you to make sure you're writing this down right now, is that autosomal recessive traits can skip generations, and affected individuals may have parents that are not affected. The easiest way to read a pedigree is to read it from the bottom up. So when I look at generation 3 here, I see I have a female who has the trait. If I go up here, I have a mom. Her mom has the trait. If I go back over here, now I don't know anything about what's going on with this mother. I have no idea what her family is like because there's nothing on the pedigree. But if I go over to the father who does not have the trait, and I go up, I have another set of parents here who don't have the trait, and I have a kid here who has the trait that has parents that do not have the trait. That's the key right here. I'm going to look at all the children. So right here I have a child, parents don't have the trait. The only way that that is possible is if we look at it as recessive. So we're going to say that this trait is little r. So we're going to assume that it's recessive. If it's recessive, this guy right here, this male, has to be little r, little r. And if he's little r, then that means his parents have to have a little r, because that little r has to come from somewhere, right? Well, his parents don't show the trait. So the only way that they can give that boy that trait is if they are heterozygous and they have the dominant trait that's masking the recessive one. So when you do these problems, look on the bottom. I have a kid who has a trait, a parent who has a trait. That doesn't tell me a whole lot. But as soon as I have a kid here who has the trait and I go up and I have parents that do not, the only way that this little guy here can get 2 little r's is if he has a parent that has the dominant allele. Okay, now let's look at something called an autosomal dominant trait that shows up on a pedigree. Remember, autosomal means that it's a non-sex determining chromosome, so it's not on the X and Y. It's not sex-linked like color blindness would. And it's dominant. And dominant traits tend to show up in every generation. And we have to have an individual that's affected, has to have a parent. One of the parents have to have that. So, like I said before, we're going to look at the bottom. So when we look on the bottom of this pedigree, we have this female who has the trait. She has a parent that has a trait. So that's good. That's telling us that it's probably that it has a possibility of being autosomal dominant. If we look over here, we have a son that has the trait. And if we go up, he has a mother that has the trait. So what would that look like if we were to do, if we were to look at traits? So we're going to look at big R, little r. So let's do like a little Punnett square for that. So right now, We're going to assume that it's dominant, so I have a big R here because we're seeing the trait, big R here because we're seeing the trait. This parent then, because this parent right here, because we don't see this trait, has to be little r, okay? And I can look here, and I have two kids that don't have the trait, so that must mean that they're recessive as well, and in order to be recessive, since we don't see the trait, they have to be homozygous, right? Which makes this parent big R, this parent big R, okay? So this is going to tell us that it's an autosomal dominant trait. Anytime, biggest thing, like I said before, read from the bottom up. Kid has it, a parent has to have it. There's no way that this child right here, with their heterozygousness, is going to get this big R trait unless one of the other parents has a big R trait. Okay, and we know that this parent isn't big R, because this parent has to give this little r to their offspring that don't have the trait. Okay, next we're going to look at sex-linked recessive traits. So these that are found on the X and the Y chromosomes, right? So we talked about how females have 2 X chromosomes, and males have an X and a Y. So these would be traits like hemophilia, color blindness, things like that. So sex-linked recessive traits are similar to autosomal recessive traits where it skips generations. So it can be hidden in your pedigree, but the more important thing is it shows up more often in males than in females. So if I look at this chart right here, I have 1 male, 2 males, and I have no females. And we talked before about how males tend to get traits more often, right, because they have just 1 X. So if there's a recessive trait and it's found on an X chromosome, it's more likely to show up on a male because they only have 1, they don't have another X to mask that trait. So here we have, the first thing really to do is to count. Do we have way more males? And by way more, I mean not, a lot. Not 3 males and 1 female is not enough. But if you have an overwhelmingly large number of males, it will be sex-linked recessive. Okay, we're going to look at an example. We're going to look at albinism or albino recessive alleles. It's, if we look at it, we have 1, 2, we have 2 females and 1, 2, 3 males. So really it's about 50-50. It's not overwhelmingly males. I mean, we have 1 more male, but it's not significantly or obviously more males than females. So it's about 50-50, approximately equal rates of frequency, so it's not sex-linked. Now let's look at this. So we're going to look at any time, we're going to start from the bottom, right? So here I have 2 kids who have it, and if I look up, I have a parent that has it. I have a kid who has it here, right? I have 3 kids in this generation, and if I go up, I have 2 parents that do not. That means that it's recessive, because if the only way for this to work is for these individuals here to be recessive, homozygous, right? And that way, the parents can look different than the offspring. So they have to give this little r is going to go, and this R right here is going to go to some of their offspring, but we don't see it, and that's why they have to have the big R's, because we are not seeing the trait. Okay, here's where you're going to quiz yourself, and you look to see whether or not this trait is recessive, or whether it's dominant, or whether it is recessive sex-linked. So push pause, take a minute, try to figure it out. If you don't pause it and try to figure it out, you're not going to know if you're doing this right or not. Okay, so we're going to look at this trait. We're always, like I said before, we're going to start at the bottom and we're going to work our way up. So this generation right here, the one on the way bottom, none of the kids have the trait. So we're not even going to really pay attention to that right now. We're going to start where people have the trait. So right here I have a child who has the trait, who has a parent that 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 has the trait. Okay, so I'm going to say that this trait is dominant. Okay, and I forgot to mention that, look, if I count, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 females, and I have 1, 2, 3 males. So I have 3 males, and 5 females. If it was recessive, sex-linked, I should have way more males. And I don't. Okay, so I know that it's not going to be recessive sex-linked. And I know that it's not recessive because it's showing up in every generation, which makes it dominant. Okay, next we're going to look at this trait. I'm going to have you pause the video for a minute, take a moment to figure out what you think it is, and when you think you're ready to check your answer, push play. Alright, first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at whether this trait is going to be recessive sex-linked. So I'm going to count how many males versus how many females. Remember, if it's sex-linked, I'm going to have more. If it's recessive sex-linked, I have more males that have the trait. So I have 1, 2 females. I have 1, 2, 3 males. That's about 50-50, so it's not going to be recessive sex-linked. Next thing I'm going to look at is whether it's dominant or recessive. So I'm going to start by looking at offspring at the youngest offspring, and I'm going to look at offsprings that are affected. So I'm not really going to focus on this end of the pedigree as far as trying to identify what kind of trait it is. I'm going to look at affected individuals. So I have an affected individual here and one here, and when I trace up, I have a parent who has it. In this generation, I have a parent who has it, and when I go up and I look, those individuals right here, the parents of this person and of this person and of this person, do not have the trait. And the only way that that can happen is to have parents who don't have the trait, to have children that have the trait, is for it to be, for the parents to be heterozygous, right? And that makes it recessive. So as soon as I see an offspring that has the trait and parents that don't, it automatically means it's recessive. Okay, once again, push pause, look at that trait, and figure out what type of inheritance it's exhibiting. When you're ready, push play. Alright, so let's look at this. First thing we're going to do, right, is we're going to look at whether it's recessive sex-linked or not, and we're going to count. I have 1, 2, 3 males, and I have 0 females. There's not a single female in this entire thing that has this trait. That's going to tell me that it is recessive sex-linked. Okay, the other nice thing about a pedigree is once we identify what type of inheritance it is, and this is that PowerPoint from before, and we determined it was recessive sex-linked, right? Because only the males have the trait. So as soon as we figure that out, we can actually figure out genotypes. So we have individuals here that are affected. We have individuals that are not, but we know that this individual right here has the trait, and somebody up here who does not have the trait has to be a carrier. So the question is trying to figure out if parents are carriers or not so they can make informed decisions about what their offspring are going to be like. So we want to know what the genotype of person A is. So you're going to push pause right now. You're going to see if you can figure it out, and then when you're ready, push play. Alright, so let's look at this person right here. We have individual A. We know that this is on the X chromosome, and the answers right here are a little, I don't know, not the way that we want them, right? We want them like this. XH, Y, X, A, little h, Y. They should be written out this way, and there's just some formatting issue that's going on. I don't have time to fix it right now, so I'm just going to go with it. XH. Okay, so we know it's on the X chromosome, and individual A right here is female. So because that individual is female, then I automatically know that they're not going to have a Y. So I can cross this out. I can cross this out. No Y chromosomes. Right? This individual, we said that it was recessive. So this individual does not show, it's not showing the characteristic. So that means that this individual is going to have this phenotype right here. Because if I do a Punnett square, and here's letter A, individual A right here is XH, X little h, right? That individual is going to give this XH to her male offspring, so he's going to have this. The Y is going to come from the dad, and we now have an individual that has an affected trait. Alright, so the question is, why use pedigrees? Geneticists often use pedigrees to try to look at traits and whether parents can expect to have an offspring with a certain trait, to learn more about inheritance and things like that. And just to kind of wrap things up, I'm going to have you look at this pedigree and try to figure out the types of relationships, compare people and individuals, and see what you think. So enjoy this pedigree. It's very interesting. You might want to push pause so that you can stop and ponder for a moment, because it's interesting. It's also, just to give you some context, it's an actual pedigree for Cleopatra and her family. Hopefully this you found this to be helpful. If not, please make sure you ask questions in class. All right, thanks. Bye.